I entered the U.S. Army as a young man of 18, and I've already told the story about my induction at the MEP station and the ride to Fort Leonard Wood where I did my basic training in AIT, and I'm not going to go into that now because what I want to tell you about in this story is what I got up to once I actually arrived at what they call your regular duty station. So your training, more or less, at least that part of it is finished. And then you get assigned someplace. I got sent to Germany, and specifically southern Germany, Bavaria, Bayern. And I got stationed on a post that was not actually in the town of Furth, which is near Nuremberg. So if you know where that is, that gives you a rough idea of where it's located. And we were about maybe 2 miles walk away from Furth, where we'd often go on the weekends to have a good time. And our post was pretty small. It was just, our combat engineer battalion, and then some post office people, and then some truckers. We had 2 gates, a front gate and a back gate. And you'd be pretty busy during the day doing all of your work. You might have to work late in the motor pool or in the armory, or you might have to do CQ, or you could be assigned guard duty as well. So you didn't have like a ton of time on your hands, but I would say at least every other weekend you were pretty free. And then, sometimes you do things at night. And so I'm going to tell you the story about some of the things that I got up to and had fun with and enjoyed at that time. And I probably won't get through everything because now that I think about it, there was an awful lot of stuff that we used to do. So once we actually got in processed and we'd gone through some of our classes that we had to take on post, for example, a 30-hour basic baby German class, right? I already knew a little bit of German, but they'd teach you things like how to get the bill at a place, or where is the bathroom, or how to order food, and all those sorts of interesting things, as well as some grammar and some other vocabulary. They kind of let us loose, and one of the first things that I did, there were these 2 brothers, the Wins, and they had been there longer than me. They were from New York City. They're also the people who introduced me to John Valdi, who's kind of a really profane piano-playing guy. They had a tape of him. And they were like, okay, now we're going to go, as we called it, on the economy. Now, the economy is everything outside of, let's call it, the American military complex. So buying things on the economy means buying things from German people, right? And going to restaurants and going to bars and going to other kinds of stores and buying things, instead of buying them at the PX, the post exchange, or on post, you would, buy things locally. And some people lived off post, with their families, and they would, for example, buy like an entire rack of beer bottles, 20 at a time, if I remember right, and you'd buy your food in the local markets and stuff like that. But there were some things that were much cheaper to buy as a soldier or a soldier's dependent in the PX, tobacco, for example, or liquor. You could go to the PX that was just for that. I think they called it the Class 6. And anyway, going back to all of this, so there was a PX, a small one on post where you could buy like cookies and beer and chips and stuff like that, shoe polish, which you were always going through, and then you get to go out into the economy. So these 2 brothers, they were like, all right, you're finally arrived. Let's go out and we're going to go to a restaurant. And I think it wasn't quite in Furth. I think it was near Furth, a little bit closer to post. And they're like, you're going to have an authentic German meal. And you're going to, practice the things that you learned about how to ask for the bill and how to say stimmt so when you give the tip, right, along with the money. So I had schnitzel for the first time. I'd never had schnitzel before. And man, was it good. And, I got really used to drinking the local Weizen Tucher, which came in Hefe and Dunkel and Kristall Weizen. It's it's not a great beer, but you get used to the beer that you like. And so I've had other Weizens after that. And I actually prefer Tucher still. And if I can get my hands on it, I really enjoy it. Although now I only drink non-alcoholic beer, so I should check whether they have some. So back then, of course, I was not drinking non-alcoholic beer. I was 18 years old. In Wisconsin, we generally start drinking quite young at parties and camping and stuff like that, illegally, of course. But now it was legal because when you're in Germany and you're 18 years old, you can drink, right? And when you're an American soldier on an American base overseas where there are no state laws, you can drink as well. So that's what we would do. So, we'd often go out to local bars and we'd get stuff to eat on the way. It was where I got introduced to gyros. I'd never had a gyro before. And man, were they good. That's sort of like, you would see them everywhere being sold by either Turks or Greeks. And it was as ubiquitous as the hamburger is here in the United States. And man, was it tasty. You go and just buy one from a stand. So lots of great food, and lots of great beer. And so, we would go on a Friday or a Saturday. Some guys were actually drinking on Sunday nights, and then they'd come to formation half drunk still. It wasn't me. And we would, be like, okay, where should we go? So there actually was a bar right across from the front gate of our post called the Kettwiesel, and that's where we would do what nowadays the kids call pre-gaming, which is to do some drinking before you go out drinking. Or we might do it in the barracks, have some shots or some beers or something sitting around in the barracks because it was cheaper, and then we'd go out to various bars. And some of them, like I remember I had a friend called Rude was his last name. I don't remember his first name. It might have been Rick. And he was super into heavy metal, and so I would sometimes go with him and see metal bands at different places, or we would take the U-Bahn into Nuremberg and go to places there. Of course, it was a little bit more expensive. I never went to the Wall, but a lot of guys would go and visit the prostitutes at the Wall, and you would drink and you would smoke and maybe you would get something to eat as well and chat with the women and dance and do other things like that. And it was a great time. The Kettwiesel was definitely a dive bar. You didn't go there to meet anybody. You went there just to blow off some steam, not go too far from the post, have a couple of Weizens and maybe a snack or two. They'd sell chips and I think pretzels and stuff. And then either another thing that we would do, we'd order Domino's pizza and they would meet you right outside of the post. So you might be in the Kettwiesel and order a pizza, and then your pizza's here, you go and get it, you go on post and you eat your pizza in your barracks room. So a lot of eating, a lot of drinking, a lot of having fun. I will say another thing about this too. I had a friend whose name was Camacho, and he was Filipino. And I met him in he had to learn some German. The teacher gave him kind of a hard time. I think she was a bit of a racist. She knew that he had a hard time with certain words because he was a Tagalog speaker. So she would make him say 55, which is 55. And he had a hard time saying the F sound. So he'd say pumpen, and everyone would laugh. But anyway, Camacho and I got to be kind of buddies. And one day, he was the only, well, no, there were a couple other Filipinos in my company. Most of them were sergeants, so they wouldn't mix with the enlisted much. But Camacho knew these other guys that were in Charlie Company. And he was like, hey, let's hang out with my friends. We're going to go to Nuremberg and have a good time. So I was like, cool, I'll go. And I meet him. And it's all these little guys. And they start drinking. And they are just taking shots. I mean, they had been drinking since they were kids. And they were like, here, have a shot, have a shot, have a shot. And before we even like get off post, I'm just blitzed and puking and having a rough time. And I went with them to Nuremberg, and I actually came home early because I could not keep up with these guys. So, there was an awful lot of that sort of stuff, partying. We'd also go to the club that was on post, and there, you could buy beers, you could get some mixed drinks. I remember there was like an idea that, if you were going to do some heavy drinking, you would drink White Russians to settle your stomach, which of course is, I think, a completely stupid idea. It's not going to settle your stomach, but that's what we would do because, it's got cream in it. So the idea is it's going to be better for you. I think dropping a bunch of beer and fried food on top of that, probably not a great idea. And then sometimes we'd like play the slots there. There were slot machines, nickel and quarter ones. But you could easily lose a lot of money pretty quickly doing that. And I saw guys go through quite a lot of their money. And then, we'd go out and walk to Furth and go to a bar, listen to some music, see if we could, chat up some local German women, usually not very successfully. Certainly I wasn't particularly successful at that, but I also wasn't much of a BSer back then, like some of my fellow soldiers. And then one of the things I remember is coming home from the bars around, 2 a.m. or so, walking back to post on a summer or autumn night, even in winter sometimes, and stopping at this place about halfway there and getting myself a Hanken, half a chicken from a rotisserie chicken restaurant. And man, did it smell good. Sometimes I'd actually get a whole chicken. And you'd bring it home, and you might still have some beers left. And you know how it is when you're drinking. You like salty, fatty, greasy food. That was just perfect. And as I remember right, it also came with pommes frites with fries. And so you just shovel that stuff in. I was 18, 19 years old. You got an appetite. You're in great shape. And so, that was one of our favorite meals that we would have. We also, did other stuff. Sometimes on post there was a place, and I don't remember exactly what it was called, but it was centrally located. It was in the same building, if I remember right, as the commander's offices. So it like those were down below, and then this was up above. And it was run by civilians who were contractors to the Army, and they had lots of cool stuff. You could play cards there. We sometimes played D&D or Axis and Allies there on the weekends, and they would show movies. They'd have VCR rentals and stuff like that they would go get, and they'd bring them in so they could show us fairly new movies. I actually saw a lot of movies there. And they also had musical instruments. But I think I'll save the musical instrument thing, where I actually learned how to play bass, for another story. But you hung out with your fellow soldiers, you did things. Our lieutenant tried to start up a soccer team, but totally unsuccessful. I and one other guy were the only people who showed up for his practice, and he wasn't very good, and I didn't want to hang out with him anyway. We actually called him Winnie the Pooh. He was what you call a butter bars, second lieutenant, so he had the gold bars, and he wasn't very good at his job, and so he wasn't held in much respect. And you could tell the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers, just treated him with complete contempt. So that didn't really fly. But there were some other things that I would do for enjoyment. And, one of them was that we were by all of these canals. And I would just take walks. I would go out and, we would run. So I got to learn a lot of the local land because we would go on these 5-mile runs pretty frequently. And then you'd go out and you would, take a stroll, smoke a cigarette on your way and look at the beautiful scenery and the sunset and, just kind of enjoy yourself. And then, of course, there was, a lot of reading books. You could buy books at the PX. We traded books back and forth. People would get into a particular fantasy or sci-fi series and you'd swap your books with the other guy who hadn't read that book. We also, you could buy comic books at the PX, and there were quite a few people who collected comic books. That's where I caught back up on the X-Men and got introduced to some really cool alternative comic, not DC, not Marvel, things like First Comics, which actually had a character, well, two characters that were really cool. There was Sensei, who is actually, it was based on the sensei of my sensei. And then there was the Badger, who is, a Wisconsin hero. And then there was Quality Comics, like Judge Dredd, Halo Jones. Usually you'd buy these comics and then you'd trade them back and forth with people. You'd be like, oh man, I haven't seen that whole stack of X-Men comics. Can I read those? And of course they'd be like, yeah, don't get them greasy. No eating food or drinking while you're reading them. But yeah, you can borrow them for a while. So those are the sorts of things that I remember doing. And, there were other things as well. Sometimes there would be going over to somebody's house and hanging out. Sometimes that would be combined with playing D&D or just playing cards and drinking and all of that. I didn't do too much of that. And I always turned down the invitations from our squad leader, as did everyone else in the squad, because we hated his guts. We called him the Grinch who stole the GI's Christmas, but he tried to have us over for Christmas and Thanksgiving and stuff. But we didn't like him, so we weren't going to do that. So there was a lot of, during downtime. The other thing I'll mention too, so we would get plenty of exercise, but I also like to go to the gym and lift weights. There were a couple guys in our platoon who were super, super into lifting weights and were just yoked, I remember one guy named Genty who was a pretty cool guy, and man, was he built. He would go to the gym every single day. I would go maybe 2-3 times a week and do some endurance lifting and, just enjoy myself. And so those are the things that I got up to as a young man before the reduction in force started sending us home after the Cold War ended. And, it's kind of a good spread of things. A lot of hanging out with buddies from my platoon or company. And a lot of things I did kind of on my own. And I still, I've been back to Nuremberg. Never been back to Furth. I'd like to go back there again sometime and see what I remember, see if the old post is even there. It was an old World War I German barracks that we were living in. So it might still be around, but turned into something different at this time. So that's the end of the story. I'll probably tell a couple other stories about some of the other aspects of how we used to enjoy ourselves there. And that's probably enough for now.